One, apologies, and I have an apology from the Mayor, I have an apology from Councillor Livingstone, an apology from Councillor Clearwater, an apology for lateness from Councillor Goff, and that seems to be all. That's fine. Okay, so those are the apologies. I'm happy to move those. Do I have a seconder? Mike Davidson. Thank you very much. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Declarations of interest. There's nothing in the open part of the meeting which has been declared, but if anything does come to light, item 2 serves as a reminder that that should be declared. Item 3, public participation, public forum and deputations by appointment, there are none. Item 4, presentation of petitions, there are none. So then we move to receiving minutes. So items 5, 6, 7, 12, 16, 20, 21, 23 and 24. I'm happy to move all of those minutes. Aaron will second. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. So then moving to item 14, Regenerate Christchurch, the performance report for the quarter 1st January to 31st of March 2018, and Ivan and Jason, welcome to the table. So this report obviously has gone through the Finance and Performance Committee. Are there any remarks that you wanted to make about this report as we move into the discussion today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, councillors. So if I take the report as read, a couple of verbal updates in addition to what was reported in the quarterly report. So as most of you will be aware, we launched the Red Zone Futures exhibition on the 26th of May. It has been open for almost 5 weeks and it closes this week on Saturday. It's an opportunity for people to give us feedback on the refined shortlist that the board decided in April. To date, we've had over 7,000 people who have come to the central exhibition and provide us with feedback. Generally, overwhelming support for the proposed land uses and in particular the green spine and the uses included within the green spine. We've also had a travelling exhibition which has gone to shopping malls, council libraries and service centres and sports fields, and that has continued right up until this week. And in addition, we've held a number of workshops with groups within the population that aren't generally well represented in public engagement. Once the engagement closes this week on Saturday, we'll then be assessing all of the feedback that we have received, and we've received lots in different forms, and we'll be presenting that to the board for them to make any decision on the final set of land uses before the plan is sent to Section 29 parties, including the council, for you to provide formal feedback and comment. In terms of moving to phase 2 of developing a regeneration strategy for South Shore and South New Brighton, so following a recent presentation that Council Laws received from the HOW team and Regenerate Christchurch and Council staff, we are now moving to phase 2, which includes establishing a physical presence within South Shore and South New Brighton to provide an opportunity for people to drop in, to have conversations, to access information ahead of implementing the engagement plan that was developed by the HOW team. And that'll be starting within the next couple of weeks. Recently we published the vision for Cathedral Square. It's had a lot of response, very interesting responses from different parts of the community, and we're now going to be working with council staff to develop a delivery strategy to look at what can be delivered and when. Finally, we are finalising the advice to provide to council by the end of June. I'm conscious that today is the Thursday before the end of June, so we're working to provide this to you by the end of the week, which evaluates progress in the central city and provides advice for the council and for the Crown to consider in terms of increasing momentum within the central city. The board was very pleased to receive from the council a draft proposal for the use of powers under Section 71 of the Greater Christchurch Regeneration Act to enable the development of a sports facility in Yaldhurst. Regenerate Christchurch provided its views on that and looks forward to receiving it from the council once those views have been considered by the council, I understand, in September. So that's a brief overview of highlights, I guess you could say, since the report was tabled. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ivan? Aaron and then Yanni. Aaron.
Just a number of us have received emails, Ivan, you're probably aware of, around the East Lake proposal and that group, and then of course they've done their proposal. So the question would be, is there any consideration, given that feedback, to that proposal in that group going forward?
Yeah, sure. So what we are doing at the moment is seeking feedback on the refined shortlist that has been published. The intention is to consider all of the feedback and then the board will make a subsequent decision, so there is an opportunity for the board to consider all of that feedback and confirm the final set of land uses that they will include in the regeneration plan. We then submit that formally to Section 29 parties, including any changes or amendments the board wishes to make. Once we have received your feedback and the feedback of other Section 29 parties, the board will make a final consideration and then submit the plan to administer.
So can you confirm that even those unsolicited bids like theirs and any others that may come in are listened to?
Yeah, we're considering and assessing all of the feedback that we've received, absolutely.
Thank you. Yanni.
Thank you. I was just interested in the timing and the release of the Central City advice. Is that going to all of us on Friday, or how are we receiving it? And obviously, I think previously I was kind of keen to get it before we finalised the LTP, which is now not possible. So are you able just to talk us through the process for us receiving and reacting to that advice,
Sure.
what the current plan is?
Yeah, thanks, Yanni. So it's the board's intention to provide for you draft advice for discussion. It's advice to the council and the Crown, so it's not our intention at this stage to make that advice publicly available. What we'd like to do is share it with you, and then later in June, once your staff have had an opportunity to work through that advice and provide you with their own advice, for us to meet with you probably in the 3rd or 4th week of July and discuss the advice that we've provided, including the recommendations.
So is there any sort of financial implications for us?
There are a range of options for you to consider, but the primary driver for us isn't to suggest that either party injects a large sum of additional funding. There are a number of other levers and mechanisms that we believe are available to the Crown and the Council to consider.
I mean, maybe it's a question of staff, how we integrate that into the recent decisions we've just made around, you know, Central City parking, rates rebates, DCs rebates.
So, Yanni, perhaps if I could suggest, because the advice is, you know, it is being finalised at the moment, there are a number of final matters that the board is considering before we submit it to you. It is being provided to you for discussion. So I'd suggest that once you've received it and then your staff have had a chance to have a look at it and provide you with advice, that there is a discussion for us to have with the councillors in July.
Yeah, let's receive the advice first, and then, you know, from there we can work out what the implications of it are and what further decisions that there are that might flow on from that. Yep. Thank you. Any further questions? All right, so we've got a resolution in front of us to receive the report, which I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Aaron? All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you very much indeed for the input this morning. Thank you. Okay, so then moving on to item 15, Development Christchurch Limited, the performance report, and we've got Rob Hall and Joe Lischke. Welcome to the table this morning. Exactly as with the last item, are there any comments or additional information that you wanted to provide alongside this report?
Yeah, thank you and good morning. And just a reminder, we have two reports with you today. There is this one and the public excluded one, which I think you will be hearing later this afternoon. But just in addition to the report that we have tabled, I can confirm that resource consent for the Christchurch Hot Pools in New Brighton has been lodged. Playground upgrades will be happening in July, which includes the work being done by Fane Robinson and Caleb Robinson, the master carvers from Naitahu, to fit the bow and stern end of the waka, which will be very exciting. And also that we're just continuing a piece of work with Lands Information New Zealand to look at investigating the potential use of compulsory acquisition powers that may need to be deployed in New Brighton.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the DCL report? All right, so we've got a recommendation in front of us to receive the report, and obviously that noting provision as well. I'm again happy to move that. Dion is happy to second. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. And then item 13, the corporate finance report, which went through the Finance and Performance Committee. Again, there's that exception around the interest rate repricing, the debt hedging there, which is the same issue that we deal with each time this report comes up. That will resolve as noted in the report. But this went through Finance and Performance. We don't have staff at the table. Were there any questions anybody was wanting to raise on this report? Dion.
I was just wondering, is it going to change now that we've done the LTP? The head, yeah, and all that. So, I mean, if we pass in something that's quite old news.
That hedging will correct itself over a couple of years, but we'll still be getting.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'm happy again to move the resolution that's in front of us. Dion is happy to second. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Now moving to the Regulatory Performance Committee, item 8, the alcohol ban in Riccarton Racecourse on New Zealand Cup Day 2018 event. Dave, you chaired this item at the committee. Do you want to make some introductory remarks, please?
Thank you. It's simply a rollover at this stage. Later in the year we are looking at a review of the bylaws, and this is likely to become a permanent fixture then, so it's an interim measure till later in the year until we review that particular bylaw.
Great, thank you. Now,
Second.
so you're happy to move, Jimmy will second. Were there any questions for staff? We've got Ruth here at the table if there are. Okay, so this has been moved and seconded. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. The Social Community Development and Housing Committee, there are two items, items 10 and 11, that we'll deal with next. We don't have the chair or the deputy chair of that committee here with us this morning. Do we have a staff member for item 10? So in the absence of the chair being here, did you want to just make some brief remarks on this report? Was there anything you wanted to draw our attention to?
So this report is proposing to extend smoke-free outdoor dining to council-owned footpath areas. So it's non-regulatory and voluntary in its nature. And it's really extending on the smoke-free policy that we've adopted and is in place across parks and things, and was extended to bus shelters and entrances and exits in 2015. So there's been some consultation on this with the community. So I think the report sort of highlights that there's support from customers and residents. There's also been some consultation with business owners. That's less clear, but there is support also from business owners with this approach. And because it is voluntary and non-regulatory, it gives them that option. So the report is to agree to extend the smoke-free public places policy to include council-owned footpaths.
So this is a change to the policy. Clearly it's not enforceable.
No,
it's voluntary.
Right. It is.
So when we have agreements, presumably, when we license a footpath for commercial use, there's an agreement which is signed.
Yes.
We don't have the ability, or presumably coming from the committee, the desire to insert a clause into those agreements requiring that this be the case.
No, so the property consultancy team, as new licensees come up, they would just bring it to their attention and talk to them about the option around that, rather than making it an actual requirement.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's voluntary. for them.
Non-regulatory,
Absolutely.
totally voluntary. Yep.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So I've got a number of questions signalled. So Jamie, Pauline, Aaron and Tim. Jamie.
Thank you. Noting that it's voluntary in nature, just in real terms, could you let me know what the difference would be then for, say, a bar that had an outdoor area, perhaps, you know, leaders on the footpath, that chose to have that as a smoke-free section, versus if this policy went ahead, what that means for that restaurant or bar?
So if they wanted to make there and have the smoke-free, then it would be just putting things in place like signage, not having ashtrays available, so sort of promoting a smoke-free environment.
So places
But
that do that
it's-
now, Coffee Culture, for example, have
Yeah.
taken this up,
Yeah,
they do that.
so other cafes,
So
doing
places
it.
that do it now, how does that differ to then the moment after this is potentially approved?
It's essentially a similar approach, yeah. So it's just it's sort of that active promotion
So it's voluntary
of a
now?
smoke-free.
And it remains voluntary afterwards?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pauline.
Oh, you just, in the report it does say that some of the commercial operators were not in favour of
That's
this.
right. Yeah.
And did any of them indicate that perhaps they thought it might be the thin end of the wedge, that it was one step towards making this obligatory and mandatory? Was there any concern about that?
No. They, some of them thought that they might lose some of their customers, and they didn't want to be seen as being the one who's making them, you know, not smoke in their areas. That's why it's all been voluntary. Those that want to, you know, adopt this can. Those that don't, that's up to them, and I think more social pressure on them and their patrons to have that smoke-free area.
So basically this is just providing support for them if they choose to go down this
Right,
path.
and then they can say, you know, well, the council has this policy that we're trying to follow, and we're trying to be good citizens and encourage us towards smoke-free.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Aaron.
Yeah, so my question is just around the unintended consequences of this policy, and given that bars tend to, when some people consume alcohol, even one drink, they like to smoke, and it might be the only time they ever smoke, so there is that kind of knock-on effect. People are smoking around these places, but by having this policy and the removal of ashtrays, people who smoke and just smoke now and then tend to just, they finish it, there's nowhere to put the cigarette butt, so they just throw it. And so the unintended consequences of this policy is that there's no ashtrays, and so as a council we're encouraging people to just drop their cigarette butt either on the footpath, which makes its way into our waterways and so on and so forth. Do we have an answer to that, or are we looking at options around that? Or do we say, please don't smoke here, but if you do, here's an ashtray to put your cigarette butts, because they belong here, not in the gutters?
I mean, that is one of the challenges of a kind of a self-policing policy. I think that is a sort of a real challenge of that.
It actually didn't come up in conversation. We were working with the Cancer Society and the Health Board representatives. That wasn't...
Well, neither of them clean them up, so...
Yeah.
But if you go to, and the best location to spot it's actually outside the hospital. There's tons there, right on the footpath, right down by the smokers ramp, or the non-smoking smokers ramp. So, yeah.
I mean, I think that is always where you extend smoke-free policies, isn't it? I mean, you have that around things like the bus shelters. That's always about how people then do dispose of it for smoking. So it's sort of adopting, you know,
because I think most of us
are new habits.
Yeah, are grateful. The night that this non-smoking law kicked in, people stopped smoking inside. It was just literally like that, and I think all the non-smokers are really happy for that. But and we've asked them to go outside and smoke there. They've now done that, but now we're saying don't smoke there, and if you do, we won't give you anywhere to put your ashtray. So I'm wondering if it is a step too far. Just the no ashtray thing.
Yeah, I mean, there are different options around that. I think they had some success with the trial. So they did a trial from November to early last year, to sort of, and these things didn't sort of arise with all of those places that actually adopted it. So those premises found it quite successful.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. This is technically an extension of what we're doing in our sports fields and parks, really, isn't it?
Absolutely,
exactly.
That's right.
Because someone mentioned before about, our event organisers or whatever required to, when they sign an event agreement to use a space, that this would be part of it. And this is an unenforceable thing if we were ever going to do that. So I would hate to do, say, council to put on something on an event organiser or a bar or whatever that we were unable to do ourselves. So I think it really works well in our sports fields and our parks. With regards to the question raised before about the cigarette butts, we also have a policy about fines for littering. Could we put that signage reminding people of their responsibilities up around these areas? I mean, that would be a positive. And it's not just cigarette butts, there are a whole lot of things that are dropped, and just to remind people, because without self-responsibility for our environment in our city and our environment full stop, then I think that we're kind of missing the point. We've actually got to throw it back, the emphasis on individuals.
Yeah.
So, and I just,
we can
the
certainly
DHB
look
could
at
also
that.
put in ashtrays, I suppose, but I think it's a good move, and it's just adding to what we're already doing.
A look at that and how it would be complemented with still sort of promoting those, discouraging people from littering. So
I think it would be quite good to be able to kind of pinpoint a couple of those people that are dropping cigarette butts. It's a small thing, but it is an issue when you put them all together into our waterways, etc. It'd be really good to be able to ping a couple of people and just a reminder that actually it's individual and self-responsibility for our community.
And I think you're actually seeing that kind of greater regulation, isn't it, of people sort of setting expectations with other people around that, isn't it, in terms of sort of...
You certainly get it around sports fields, like it's very seldom now someone would even light up, that is, they'd probably run off to the car park and hide, but even there they get pinged by the other parents.
All right, so keeping with questions, Dave and then Vicky. Dave.
I just want to follow up a little on the comments that both Aaron and Tim have made, really, on unintended consequences. And whilst I'm very supportive of what's being proposed here, we do have that problem of cigarette butts in the mall or outside the bars or the hospital or whatever. But one thing that alarms me a little bit, and it's a level of service that we've probably got to go back and review, is that we've actually removed countless rubbish bins around the city. So on the one hand, if we are wanting to promote smoke-free areas around our restaurants and bars, well, particularly restaurants, which I'm hugely in favour of, if we are going to promote that, I do support the notion that we perhaps need more signage around public spaces about responsibilities.
Is this moving to a question?
My question is,
thank you.
Can we, in association with this, I think we need to ask staff to review the level of service for the supply of rubbish bins around the city as well. So that's my roundabout question. It was probably more directed at the chief executive, I think. Can we, if we are promoting a better and healthier city in terms of our attitude to smoking and litter, that we do review that level of service for the placement and supply of rubbish bins?
Well, I think we should consider that, but you'll have absolutely opportunity to do that when we look at levels of service.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Vicky.
Mine's also an opportunistic question, sorry. So in I3, I have no problem with any of this resolution, but I'm just wondering if in 3, and I'm not going to ask you to do it now, I just want to know if it's legally possible, that we could actually request licensing staff to provide information about single-use straws and other rubbish at the same time? Would that be possible, or I'm not going to ask you to do it now?
We are working on a paper
Cool.
around plastic straws, so that will be coming shortly. Yes, I have Kevin Crutchley on that as we speak.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so do we have a mover? Have we moved? No, nobody's moved this already, have they? So do we have a mover for this resolution? Tim will move, Vicky will second. Is there any debate? Jamie?
Yeah, look, with every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, and I'm not going to support 1, 2 and 3. I am going to support 4 and 5. Recommendations 4 and 5 is that it notes that the Cancer Society will provide stickers and material for licensed premises wanting to become smoke-free, and 5 notes that that health organisations will work with those businesses that want to become smoke-free. I think that that's ample, and going back to with every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, we only need to think, and this is something we do a lot of in council, parking issues. Whenever you say you can't do something here, then the problem moves somewhere else, and that's fine so long as that's manageable. So we have legislation saying you can't smoke inside. That's accepted. So we ask people to go outside. By then seriously urging them or essentially saying that they can't go outside, I don't know where you expect them to go. People that want to smoke are still going to smoke. And if they can't smoke in parks, they can't smoke inside, and they're enjoying their beer at the end of the week, sitting outside on a council sitting on a lena on council property, do you expect them to stand in the middle of the Avon River or in the middle of the road? So I think it's a little bit draconian and slightly 1984-ish if you're telling people that what they can and can't do. They have every right to have a cigarette. Well, they're having a drink outside. We want them to go outside, and actually once they're finished with their cigarette, if they must smoke, we'd quite like them to put in an ashtray. But I think that if you tell them that they can't smoke and you put in, or you create an environment where it's completely unacceptable for them to go outside and smoke, they are still going to smoke anyway. So I think we need to be wary about what what the implications of that are. If you take something away, you have to provide something else. So I just don't think it's realistic. I think the fact of the matter is 1 in 10 people regularly smoke. 1 in 10 New Zealanders do, and there will be a heck of a lot more that will have the odd cigarette with a drink. And the most likely time that the environment that they'll do that is that they go down to the pub at the end of the week, they order a beer, they can't smoke inside, so they'll sit outside in an area where there's an ashtray and have a cigarette with their drink. And whether you agree with that or not, that is the reality of life and the lifestyle for a number of people. So just simply telling them that they can't smoke inside and they can't smoke outside, what the heck do you expect them to do? I think it's nanny state gone mad, and I won't be supporting it. I think there are far more important things that council should be doing other than telling people they can't have a cigarette outside.
Pauline?
Yeah, thank you. Look, I agree with a lot of the things Jamie's saying, and I don't believe in the nanny state. However, this is around food, and I don't think anyone likes cigarette smoke being blown around food, and I think because it's a voluntary nature and we're offering support to people who want to engage us, so commercial operators will, I would say, if they're worried about losing custom and looking after their customers, they might have a designated area outside that's not around the eating area, so that's up to them to sort that out. So because it's voluntary and because it's around food, I'll support this today.
Tim?
I certainly hope the Cancer Society stickers are biodegradable, because we've got enough trouble with the cigarette butts. Look, I'm going to support this. Being an ex-smoker myself, I feel very privileged to be able to say I've given up, which is fantastic. I'm holier than thou, although there's nothing quite like a cigarette, but we'll move on. I really do think seeing the change around sports fields, etc., and to carry this on, I think is just a natural progression, because the facts of the matter are smoking kills people. We do not want to encourage it, and to have 1 in 10 people still regularly smoking affects 9 people around them. So I think we've got to lead by this. It's not forcing people, it's encouraging people by voluntary. We do that in our sports fields and it works extremely well. So I will be supporting 1 to 5.
Sarah?
Thanks. Just joining the chorus of in favours here. It's an exaggeration to say that we're telling people they can't smoke outside. It's a complete nonsense. All we're saying is it's in those outdoor dining areas on council-owned footpaths. Many businesses have their own outdoor areas that aren't on council footpaths, and people will smoke in those. But if you have, you know, a group of mums and their kids and they've been for a walk and they're sitting down for coffee, what you don't want is a whole pile of smokers sitting down at the next table, puffing smoke over towards them. You know, it's quite easy for someone to get up and, you know, walk 5 metres away or go and stand on the riverbank, as Jamie would like them to do, or in the middle of the river. Maybe not so much, and not blow smoke over people who are enjoying a quiet coffee. And I think it's quite straightforward. It's voluntary. Businesses will choose to do it, or they will choose not to. And I think, you know, public good in a public place is what we're about. Dave?
As a smoker who gave up when he was 11, I support the recommendations before us, and I think I'd just like to note really that the intention really is, and through them all, is around restaurants and food, as Pauline said. And look, I am all in favour of this sort of move, and I think, you know, some other speakers have noted that a number of institutions, bars particularly, do have their own smoking areas on the premises or in their own title of land. So I don't think it's going to be a big issue, but I am very keen on seeing a voluntary policy on smoking around food areas being implemented. So yes, I will support the resolutions.
Aaron.
I probably would have let this one slip, but I think it was Jamie that won me over in his explanation of what people do at 5 o'clock on a Friday. And I tend to agree with him and will vote the same way that he is against 1, 2 and 3, even though I hated my parents smoking, never smoked myself, so I'm not a reformed smoker. But I've been around hospo for a while and seen the practices in play. And I think asking people to go outside and smoke was enough. That had a huge impact on people that work in the industry, and that was good enough. Smokers have been really good about it. They've gone out and stood in the cold now for 10 years, and good on them. But it is a step too far. And given that I think in Christchurch now there's less than 10 actual pub licences left, every other licence is actually a food licence where you go to drink. They can only be open because they've attached themselves as a restaurant, is how they get around it. And there's not many of the pubs. If you can name them all, I'll give you a prize. Won't be a packet of cigarettes, it'll have to be a beer this time.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the comments that have been made around the table. There's no harm in this, and there may well be some good in it, in my view. This is purely voluntary. People will choose whether they smoke or not. Businesses will choose whether they provide outdoor smoking areas or smoke-free areas or not. All we're doing here is the couple of noting provisions that everybody's happy with, 4 and 5. That's a matter of fact. And 1, 2 and 3. 1, you know, is a policy change which keeps the policy absolutely voluntary. We're encouraging rather than requiring, and each individual business will decide how it wants to respond to this change in policy, and each individual smoker as a customer of those businesses will decide how they choose to respond to that. But promoting smoke-free outdoor spaces, in my view, is entirely commendable, and it remains voluntary how businesses respond to that, and I think that's absolutely the right approach. So it's certainly a soft-handed rather than heavy-handed approach, but in my view it's a move in the right direction, and it represents a further step in what really has been quite a strong relationship between the aspirations of the Cancer Society and the Fresh Air Project with Council and with the committee, and I'm sure the Chair and Deputy Chair would have said this if they were here, over a number of years, but that's always focused on the voluntary nature of smoke-free rather than an enforcement approach. So I'll be happy to support this today. So we've got a mover and a seconder, so I'll put the motion.
Can you put 1, 2 and 3 first?
Yep, I will. So I'll put 1, 2 and 3 first. All those in favour? Aye. Against?
No.
So Jamie, the only one against? No. And Aaron as well? Yep. And then I'll put 4 and 5. All those in favour? Against? So those are carried, and 1, 2 and 3 are carried with those couple of dissenters as well. Thank you. So then moving to the second item from that committee, the heritage item, approval of extension of time for Central City Landmark Heritage Grant for Maclean's Mansion, 387 Manchester Street. So Brendan and Carolyn, welcome to the table. Do you want to provide just some brief background comment to this report before we consider it?
Yep, this is a request for an extension of time to an existing landmark, Central City Landmark Heritage Grant that you approved back in January 2017, I think. And the building you're probably all aware of, the trust that's purchasing the building from the current owners has gone through some change of trustees, and they've basically moved to a point now where they can actually proceed with the project. There were some stall issues with the trust, and in terms of the negotiations with the current owners for the price that they were having to pay for the building. And that's been resolved, and the trust is all ready to go with some new trustees. The chair is Chris Kissling from the Christchurch Civic Trust, and there are a number of other trustees with good experience with heritage buildings, and Trevor Lord is also a trustee. So we've got a very one-off chance, I suppose, to really proceed and do something with this great building. And we have an organisation that's got an appropriate use for it once the works are done. It will be a phased project because of the scale of the building. It's a 53-room mansion, so it has to be phased. And hopefully, the first phase will be sufficient to generate that rolling interest in the building and generate income for other phases to then continue. It's a huge project, but it's a fantastic building. So, as I say, we're seeking an extension to an existing grant. This isn't new money. This is money that's already been allocated from previous years, and we're just asking that it be carried over for another 18 months to give them sufficient time to actually get on with the works.
So 2 questions arising from that. The first of which just relates to the last line in the recommendation. The new completion date for the project would be the 8th of December 2019. You've obviously got a reasonable degree of confidence that will be achieved, and the committee obviously had a degree of confidence that would be achieved in as much as they're making this recommendation to council.
Yep. I would say that the chances are that the whole project won't be complete by then, but sufficient works will have been completed to secure the building and to utilise the full grant. And I would expect that, given the scale of the project, it would be highly optimistic to say that the whole thing will be completed in 18 months. But as I say, sufficient works will have been done for securing and finding a use for the building, and that's the target.
So if we didn't approve this recommendation today, obviously the extension wouldn't occur, the opportunity for the building would be lost, for this particular building would be lost, and the funds would return back to the Landmark Heritage Grant pool for reallocation. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
Thank you.
As I say, this is the one-off chance. The trust has there's nobody else out there competing with them for this building, so this is a kind of once in a blue moon, really, to actually get a trust that's willing and able to take on the task of doing this work.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just pick up on your point around the funds returning to the landmark grant pot for reallocation? We just have to check, and I don't know the answer to this, but this is so close to the end of the financial year that we would just have to confirm that would be the case.
Okay, it may not turn out to be, the answer to the question may not turn out to be relevant anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, thank you. So I've got Dion and Mike. Dion.
Yeah, I just wanted to tease out a little bit more about the completion date. So are you quite certain that by the 8th of December, when the resolution would expire again, that they will be in a position where they can draw down, well, be granted the money, the 1.9? Are you pretty confident, or seriously confident at this stage?
Yeah. They're ready to go. So as reasonably confident as you can be. Obviously.
Yeah, because my concern is that obviously there will be a new council at that stage, and I just don't want it to end up rolling into a new council to make that decision, because then all of a sudden there's some uncertainty for the you know, the trust that's doing this work.
No, I understand that, but as I say, as reasonable, I'm as confident as I can be. The trust has got the experience on it now. These are people who are used to dealing with these kind of projects. They're 3 or 4 members of the Civic Trust. There's an architect on the trust board now. They've got as good a chance to do this as anybody could.
Yeah,
so I'm
a subsequent
pretty
question,
confident.
A subsequent question really is would it be wise, or well, would it be wise, or should it be done to make it 12 months, so that we can, if it's not, you know, there might be a bit more certainty around where they're at, so that you can actually make a decision to extend it again under the current circumstances, or do you?
Well, there's no benefit to them getting a reduction in time. We haven't done that with anybody else. Realistically, they will need 18 months. This is a big project. I'd really prefer to give them the certainty that they've got a recognised and established length of time to do these kind of works. We've had this 18-month period of time since the grants began. It's the kind of time frames that you really do need to make sure that any unforeseen circumstances, and there usually are some with a heritage building like this, in its current state, that you build in some flexibility for them. I don't think 18 months is unreasonable.
Yeah, no, I'm not worried about the 18 months. What I'm worried about is that it comes to the 18 months, there's a new council that might have a new direction or something like that, and then it gets to that, they're almost done, and then all of a sudden they need to get to that extension point, and they go, no, you can't do it.
Yeah, we'll be in touch with them. Obviously, once assuming the grant is approved and the work start, we'll be in touch with them on a regular basis, usually every...
trying to think strategically, and because I want to make sure that this actually happens, because it's an amazing building that needs to stay in the city.
Yeah, I don't think that would help them. That's all.
Okay. I'll take your advice on that.
Yep.
Thank you. Mike.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. So the trust, do they now own the building?
They're in the last day today of their due diligence on purchasing the building. So they can only do it with some certainty of funding. So they're waiting for your decision.
So the other question, I guess, around the financial impact. So this near $2 million grant, when was the financial impact of that felt? Was that already been...
It's committed.
So it's committed, so it has already...
Yes.
Okay.
8th of December 2016.
Okay, so that's sort of when it went off our books, and we don't have to have that...
No, it's a committed. It's already committed in the way that the accounts are considered.
Thank you. Just following on from Dion's question, if there was a concern about certainty and the length of time, presumably that would lead to a consideration of whether we would make the period of extension longer rather than shorter. So if we were to say 24 months rather than 18 months, would that address the issue that Dion has raised? If there was some doubt that 18 months would be long enough, presumably you would go to a longer period before a further decision was required rather than a shorter one?
Yeah, but what that does, that 18 months, I say it's a fairly well-established time frame. If they are, for whatever reason, going to exceed that, then we'll come back to you seeking a further extension, and that may just be for whatever time they advise. It could be 6 months, it could be another year.
Yeah,
so,
but better to do that by further decision at that time, but you would bring that back to us prior to October 2019, so that it would be this elected council that made that decision rather than a future council.
So you could perhaps, is there value in a second resolution. Is this necessary? That perhaps you seek that if the grant isn't expended by, let's say, August 20 or July 2019, that there is a report back within this current council. Is that necessary here?
I think it might be good to pick up the point that's been made.
Nodding no.
I think it risks the funding.
We could note that.
Yes. But the current policy and operational guidelines, that's the norm. So if within 12 months from now they haven't proceeded with the works, then there's something gone badly wrong again.
So as a matter of course, you would come back to council for a decision 6 months out from the 8th of December 19, which is before October 19 anyway.
Initially, we work with them, we contact them, and we make sure that the process and the project is proceeding in accordance with the kind of anticipated expenditure that they've committed. So if we get to a point, and we always write to successful applicants to remind them that after a period of time, they really should have started to claim the grant, because the grant should have been fully claimed by the 18 months. So if we're getting no response from them, then obviously something's not right. So we will write to them, but I don't think we'll get to that situation. We will find out pretty early on whether or not the works are proceeding, and then usually what happens is because it's such a large grant and a large project, we will agree some sort of phased payments for them to keep the thing rolling, and that's again part of the operational guidelines and policy that we can do that. So
I think from that we can be comfortable that the issue that's been raised, it's in hand. It will be addressed if it needs to be addressed. And clearly the important part today is to provide them certainty so that they can settle on the purchase deal.
They can settle it, yeah.
Yep. All right.
Could I just also note that there are regular reports to the committee on the grants and the I think that includes the extension, so the committee would have visibility from that perspective and the opportunity to raise that with staff through that reporting process as well.
Yeah.
And we can pick that up and note that those reports should reference the works with McLean's.
Yeah, it sounds as though all the checks and balances are in place. Dion, did you have something further? No. All right, so can I then have a mover for this report? So Aaron seconded Dion. Any debate? All those in favour? Oh, Mike.
Sorry, and I'll probably start other people talking now, but that's all right. When this first came to council, I did oppose it, so I will oppose it again. I just struggle with the quantum of these grants. You know, it's nearly $2 million, and we know that represents 0.5% of rates. And we've just gone for a long-term plan where we've seen rate increases of over 5%, and people out there are struggling. I can't say yes to this when we have so many people that they're actually out there struggling. They're on fixed incomes, and this is where we see the priority line.
Thank you. I'd make the point that these funds are already on budget and have been on budget for some time, have already been allocated to this project. And if we weren't to approve this today, there's some question about whether the funds would come back to the Landmark Heritage Grant Fund, although from previous examples my understanding is that it would. That would then mean that these funds would be allocated to other similar projects rather than being used to alleviate any other council funding pressure or create a rates reduction, given that we've just approved the long-term plan, but certainly appreciate the sentiment. I will now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, Mike, did you want your vote recorded against? Mike, did you want your vote recorded against? Yeah, sure. Okay, we'll do that. So now moving to item 17, the Audit and Risk Management Committee. Just one moment. Okay, so this has obviously already been through the Audit and Risk Management Committee. There are a number of noting outcomes from the discussion at that committee. Are there any questions for staff on this? All right, so I'm happy to move the recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Raf? All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Then moving to item 18, the Audit New Zealand report to Council on the audit of the consultation document for the 2018-28 long-term plan. And what we got was an issue of an unmodified opinion, which is noted in this outcome. So I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Pauline? All those in favour? Against? That's carried. And then the Audit New Zealand Interim Management Report, item 19. And again, a number of noting provisions in Part C and receiving the report in Part A. So again, I'm happy to move that. Dave East is happy to second. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Now moving on to the Infrastructure, Transport and Environment Committee, item 22, construction site hoardings. Pauline, did you want to make some introductory remarks on this one, please?
Yeah, continuation of construction site hoardings, which is that's the waiver of the fee that would normally be incurred to occupy council land, providing that they kind of pretty it up and make it look really interesting. So this is already in process. It's been well used. So the committee saw no issue with this and unanimously supported the staff recommendation. Happy to move it.
So you're happy to move this. Mike's happy to second. Are there any questions on this one? Yanni.
Yeah, thank you. Was there any consideration given to outside of the central city?
Oh, yeah, we did talk about that. There's been absolutely no uptake on that. So in A there, reduce the areas available for the fee waiver to focus on the central city. I don't know how other committee members feel. I didn't see that as a biggie. Actually, I wouldn't mind if we took that out because actually staff have had no applications from outside the central city to date, and it is considered on a case-by-case basis.
So are we charging anyone outside of the central city?
Carolyn?
I'm just getting my right-hand person on this one.
So Yanni's talking about the outside of the central city.
Yeah, the questions really are around the thinking of reducing the areas available for the fee waiver to focus on the central city. Pauline's given an answer to that question and has also indicated that she would be happy to remove that change. But the question that we've got now is whether there have been any applications and whether we're charging anybody outside of the central city.
This is not something that I am dealing with directly, but I am aware that that staff in the building control and the transport area are beginning to look at this, and that's all that I can provide you information on at this stage.
But the thinking of reducing the areas available for the fee waiver just to focus on the central city is because there hasn't been uptake in the suburban areas. Is that correct?
That's what you told the committee. There haven't been any applications.
But of course that doesn't mean that there won't be future opportunities in suburban areas, particularly bearing in mind that some areas, you know, construction hasn't really fired yet, but we hope that it will in the near future.
Potentially. Brindy, what's your take there, the work that's been done on that?
My understanding from the asset protection team is to date there really hasn't been any uptake in suburban centres, and partly that's because of building requirements. They're not as, the requirements aren't where they have to build to the boundary in the suburban centre, so there's less need to be on public ground.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
Sorry, if you could just repeat that again, the comment about building to the boundary?
So my understanding is that in the central city, there's often a requirement to build boundary, and so then there's a need to push the hoarding line into public realms. So
in order to do the construction, they need to occupy some of the council's space.
Yeah, that would be the case in some suburban areas as well. I mean, there's a requirement in Littleton, for example, to build right up to the pavement boundary.
So, I mean, I just can't see the harm in leaving it in if there is a case where people can
I would tend to agree with that. Pauline, would you be happy to move the resolution with that recommended change removed?
Yeah, just giving staff advice that there could be an added cost.
So the fee waiver, so there is so this means that from a staff perspective, there is a budget that is necessary to pay into the fee waiver. So while this sits over, while this sits there as being available for suburban areas, we would make an estimate of how much funding, and the funding is, it's in terms of council budget, the whole budget, it's not significant, but it still nevertheless needs to be accounted for. So that's one of the implications of leaving the suburban centres here.
And what has the uptake on the budget been in the past? Have we fully expended this budget or not in the past?
We haven't, have we? No.
So it's likely that there's capacity there.
Yep.
Mike, are you happy for that change? Okay, so Pauline, you already moved this, so let's put this back to the...
I didn't move it. I think it's Yanni who's moving it. I said I wouldn't...
No, so you moved the original resolution.
Yes.
So we'll need to deal with this as an amendment then in that case, which, Yanni, you're happy to move. Do you want to give us some wording or just remove the... So the amendment would be that we don't make the change to reduce the areas available for the fee waiver to focus on the central city. I'm happy to second that.
Is it okay?
So let's just get the wording up.
Chairman, could we get an idea of the support for the changes, just to save time?
Well, we'll put the amendment and vote on it. So were there any further questions before we do that? Questions of staff? Dion?
Number 5.3, the estimated revenue. So for the second half of 2017-18, $211,000 is the estimated lost revenue. And so would that be double for the whole financial year, effectively? So is this costing, well, is the lost revenue about $400,000 a year is what I'm asking? Because it's not really that clear.
I think that'd be fair to say, yeah, but there obviously are some coming online and some coming offline, so we couldn't say exactly double.
I mean, it's the best indication we have of an annual.
Yeah, we had this big debate about $400,000 lost revenue for a 1 hour free car park sort of situation. Then we've got $400,000 of lost income because of this, and we didn't actually go out and do a massive consultation or whatever like that. I'd leave that.
All right, thank you. So let's deal with the amendment first. So Yanni, you're moving, I'm seconding. Yanni?
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I think anything we can do to enhance the presentation of our city is really important, and there's been a huge focus in the central city, and I'm not criticising that, but we've got derelict sites in our suburbs that are just sitting there languishing, creating huge eyesores for people. I appreciate that there hasn't been any uptake yet of those suburban sites, but I would have thought that means that it's cost neutral to leave it in, and it may be that it's not used. But if there was a case for it, then I'd rather the ability for it to be able to be applied rather than have an exception, because just having footpaths blocked off in the suburbs with ghastly construction hoardings, I think is really you know, why should that be okay in the suburbs but not in the central city? So I think the amendment's harmless, it's rates neutral, and it just provides the ability for it, if there's a need for it, to be able to be done.
I would concur with the comments that have been made, and I don't see why we would make a change to remove this opportunity from the suburban areas just because it hasn't been taken up in the past. We know that there are a number of suburban areas that haven't redeveloped as quickly as we might have liked. To be charging developers for use of public space when that's necessary, when we know that in some of those suburban areas development economics is marginal at best, why we would be putting an additional burden onto those, I don't really understand. And at the same time, the comments that Yanni has made regarding, you know, the appearance of our suburban areas, particularly during construction projects, surely the considerations around appearance of suburban areas in that situation would be exactly the same as they would in the central city. I would suggest the only reason we haven't had uptake in the suburban areas is that the development hasn't happened as quickly as we might have expected. There may be a future application for this. We shouldn't rule it out. It may or may not be taken up. But yeah, the amenity of our suburban areas is just as important as the amenity in the central city. Jamie.
Very briefly, yep, no worries with the amendment. Makes sense to apply it to the suburban centres as well. The only thing I'll add to this is, and my apologies for sounding like a broken record then with this debate, but I think it's really important as a council that if you take with one hand, you need to give with the other. So we are indeed charging those irresponsible, I would suggest, landowners that have derelict sites that encroach into the public realm, but for those that are getting on with the job, investing in the city and trying their best to make sure that the rebuild is positive and that their construction hoardings are attractive and compliant with our regulatory framework, then I think that they should be rewarded as well. So there's absolutely no sense in punishing those good people that are doing exactly what we want them to do. So very happy to support the recommendations.
Thank you. Further debate on the amendment? Okay, so Pauline.
As the mover of the original, I'm happy to support the amendment as well. I agree with everything that's been said. I don't envisage the uptake will be massive anyway, so hopefully it won't impact too much on your budget for the central city. But I think it's a fair call that this be applied everywhere, so I'll support it too.
All right, so I'll put the amendment. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? So the amendment's carried. So nothing else on the substantive motion with the amendment incorporated? Dion.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agree with what Jamie said. I think this is, you know, tidying up the central city is really important, and actually sort of having some incentives there to make the developments tidy is great. But I do question how it's actually working in reality sometimes. There's some of these sites, you know, they've got creative hoardings, but around them are still very dirty, very filthy. Our central city isn't a very tidy place, and actually we need to start thinking about everything else that's going on in the central city and what we actually can do to actually tidy it up, because it is a real big construction area. If you sort of look around, it's not just the hoarding sites. Actually, these areas that are working on public roads and they're driving out trucks out going on the road and the mud's sort of following them. I don't think we're enforcing enough around actually creating a tidy environment for our central city, and I really want us from this to actually start thinking of that, because we are losing a lot of revenue on giving these incentives, and maybe we should be thinking about how we can look at that revenue that's lost and actually doing other things that might be able to tidy up the central city.
Thank you. Now, Mike, I
will support this.
You'll support it, great. Mike, I just want to check in with you. Are you still happy to be the seconder of this motion with the amendment included? Yep, that's great, thank you. All right, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. So now I will resolve to exclude the public, and we've got a number of named people in this resolution for the various different papers that we're going to be considering. So I'm happy to move this resolution as it stands. Do I have a seconder? So Vicky? Okay, Yanni?
I just ask that you put some separate, please.
Yep. What do you want put separately?
And I'd like the 48 put separate. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So I'll do that. I'll put 48. Yep. We're happy? Yep, so I'll put 48 separately and I'll do that first. So,
And 47.
resolution to, I'm sorry?
Oh, and 47.
And 47. All right, so I'll put 48 separately first. So resolution to exclude the public in respect of item 48. All those in favour say aye. Yeah. So in favour of excluding the public for item 48, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Can the noes please raise their hands? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, yep, that's carried. Did you want that recorded? Yep, all right. So it was, sorry, can you just raise your hands again? So it's Yanni, Aaron, Dion, Mike and Sarah. And item 47, resolution to exclude the public in respect of item 47. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? And the noes, can you please raise your hands again? So Yanni, Aaron and Mike. Okay, so then the remainder of the resolution, all those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried.